Nearly 2 million people visit Alaska between May and September of each year. More than 50% of those are cruise passengers. That percentage would increase dramatically if you're just talking about the Inner Passage area of Alaska, where there are lots and lots of very large cruise ships. While it is completely understandable that people cruise in Alaska, many of the cities and towns are not connected by road, and the only way that you can really get to them is by sea or air. I really would recommend doing the Inner Passage by ferry, by the local ferry. While undoubtedly the cruise ships are posher than the local ferry, what the local ferry gives you is, one, the opportunities to stop at different places for as long as you want rather than having to fit to a schedule. It also allows you to meet other fellow independent travellers, Alaskans, etc. And I think it's really a lovely way to see the Inner Passage, and I would definitely recommend that you do this if you're going to be considering going to Alaska. Juneau is the capital of Alaska, and it nestles at the bottom of Mount Roberts. Juneau is an absolute cruise ship mecca. 5 cruise ships per day can dock in Juneau, and often do. That makes the city incredibly busy. One of the really nice things that people want to do is to go up onto Mount Roberts, and there is a cable car that takes you part of the way up there to a restaurant, and thousands of people do that every day. It is possible to walk up to the restaurant through a trail which there's not many people on, and there's also walks and trails from the top of the cable car, and people do that. Not so many, so therefore you can actually walk up Mount Roberts without being sort of confronted with too many people, although in my view there's still quite a few people who actually do it. Fabulous views get you at the top. The Mendenhall Glacier, which is just not that far outside of Juneau, is also a really popular thing with the cruise ships. And again, there are loads and loads of buses taking cruise ship passengers to visit the Mendenhall Glacier. It's less easy to avoid the crowds when you go there, because most people would want to go and visit the glacier and also this absolutely amazing waterfall, and that's where everybody else wants to go and visit as well. However, the place is absolutely spectacularly beautiful, so therefore it's, I guess, well worth sort of not avoiding the crowds on this occasion, but actually going to visit this glacier and the waterfall. I actually think the waterfall is much more spectacular than the glacier, because like most glaciers, the glacier is receding and therefore it doesn't look as great as it once did. Salmon are also in the rivers in the Mendenhall Glacier area, and well, these are sockeye salmon, and they are spawning at this time of the year, in that sort of late July, early August, and so therefore you can go and watch them as they're sort of spending the last week or so of their life. Where there are salmon, of course, there are also bears, and the rangers on at the glacier will actually seek out the bears and announce on their microphones, so that tourists like myself can then go looking for bears. I would say the scenery and the whole ambience of the Mendenhall Glacier area, the national park, is absolutely beautiful, and it really is worth a visit, although don't be deterred by the crowds. Skagway is one of the towns on the main cruise ship itinerary, which means it is very busy. It purports to have the most photographed building in Alaska. It's incredibly elaborate, as you can see, but I guess it's the most photographed because it's such a cruise ship itinerary destination. However, it is possible to get off the main track by hiring a bicycle and going on a cycle ride. The one that I went to took me to the bottom or the start of the Chilkoot trail. It's a really pretty cycle ride and is on gravel tracks, but a really good travel track, so you can easily make your way through there even if you're not a particularly experienced cyclist. The other main thing that people do when they visit Skagway is to travel on the White Pass and Yukon Railway, and that is a really amazing journey. It's a really old train that takes you on quite a dodgy track at times, and it goes really quite slowly. Totally, completely picturesque scenery for the whole of the trail. Skagway was part of the Alaska Gold Rush phase. The town grew up as a result of the Gold Rush, and earlier on you will have seen a picture of a cemetery. This cemetery has various famous Gold Rush people in it, including a guy called Soapy Smith, who was basically a bandit during the Gold Rush. And it was really interesting to go and explore the history of the Gold Rush alongside of taking this absolutely fantastically magnificent train ride. My understanding of the train ride is that it's primarily operated for cruise ship passengers, and the cruise ship have, I think, by about 6 of the 8 carriages, or however many carriages there are, I can't really quite remember, but they buy the bulk of the carriages. But if there are some spaces, then independent travellers can travel on the railway in a carriage that's dedicated for them. And that's exactly what we did. You can, and most people actually get off the train about the halfway point and then take a walk up to a glacier. We decided to go to the end of the track and then come back, get off the train and then walk to the glacier at that point, getting a later train. And that worked really well for a number of reasons. One was that I think the most spectacular part of the whole train journey is after you leave the glacier stop. But it also meant that when we got off at the other end, the glacier track, which is normally really busy, wasn't busy until we actually got up to the glacier. So we were able to walk for most of that journey on our own and most of the journey on our way back. And since I like walking without crowds of people, that to me was really special and fantastic, and a really nice way to do the White Pass and Yukon Railway. The railway was built as part of the Gold Rush, and you pass by the track that sometimes people would walk on, the prospectors would walk on. This was a really difficult and dangerous journey for gold miners. They were not allowed into Canada, which was their ultimate destination, unless they carried a ton of food and equipment with them that would last them for many months. As a result, the prospectors had to make several trips across this quite dangerous path before they were actually even allowed to begin gold prospecting. And so the railway actually came along as a much better alternative to the Gold Rush traditional way of getting there, and was used, I think, during the Gold Rush by prospectors. Another interesting fact is this was the first railway built in Alaska. Alaska is a huge state, as most people know, and it has a tiny population. towns and cities that aren't really joined to any other town and city, and very, very difficult to get to. There are no roads to many of the towns of Alaska. Indeed, there are no roads into Juneau, the capital, and it's also quite difficult to get to many of them by sea. So therefore, the use of float planes to get around Alaska is essential and is widely used. You can get a license to fly a plane when you're 14 in Alaska, and I believe that among the adult population, 1 in 9 people have an aeroplane license. We travelled by float plane a couple of times in Alaska, mostly to visit places like Brooks Falls and Katmai and various other points. It was really good fun flying by float plane. Taking off from the sea was quite good fun, and landing on the sea, but it was also really good fun to they don't go very high, so it means that you're very close to the ground and therefore can see in quite a lot of detail the terrain that you're passing through. So flying, instead of becoming the trial that it usually is, actually becomes part of the experience of what you're doing, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. Nome is famous for 2 main things. The first is the Iditarod Trail, and the second is the Nome's gold mining, which has been made famous on the Discovery Channel by a man called Sean Pomranke, who owns the gold mine in Nome. The Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race is an annual long-distance sled dog race run in early March from Anchorage to Nome. Mushers and a team of 16 dogs start in Anchorage, and at least 5 dogs must be on the tow line at the finish line. They cover the distance in approximately 8 to 15 days. The trail is over 1,000 kilometres long, and it was originally started to commemorate the 1925 Sealam Run to Nome, which was also known as the Great Race of Mercy. In 1925, there was an outbreak of diphtheria in Nome and surrounding communities, and the antitoxin that was needed to be able to fight this diphtheria wasn't available in Nome. So a team of 20 mushers and 150 sled dogs began a mad dash to Nome to save the children and the people of Nome. And it was from a historical perspective that the Iditarod Trail became famous and actually got started. Nome is incredibly remote, and it is not reachable by road. You have to fly in. It's near the most westerly point of Alaska. 2 roads fan out from Nome. One is the road to the native village of Teller, which is the most westerly point that you can reach by road from Nome. There's another one just slightly further on called Wales, but you actually have to fly into that. The second road leads from Nome in another direction to a place called Council, but you can't actually arrive in Council, reach Council by the road, because there's a river separates you from this village, and unless you are an incredibly experienced Nomian, if you want to call it that, then you don't know how to get across this river to get to the village of Council, and I think it's only passable anyway within a few months of the summer each year. So we had a car to drive, first of all, one day to the Teller, the native village, and then on the second day, part of the way along the Council Road. Hiking in Nome is also very typical of Nome. It's not especially pretty place, and one of the famous walks is above the gold mine, but there you can just looking down on the gold mine, and also you can drive virtually to the top of this hill, and 2, it's filled with all this detritus, communication stuff, etc. While gold is seen as a glamorous and expensive metal to possess, mining for gold certainly is not. So gold mining in Nome is basically an industrial operation where huge quantities of soil are sort of dug up with these huge machines in order to extract what are relatively small quantities of gold. Gold can only be extracted from the ground for short periods of time, for 3 or 4 months actually, because of the cold conditions. Basically the ground freezes over so hard that it's just not possible to mine anymore. So once the gold has somehow been extracted with these huge machines, the next task is then to basically pan for gold in the really old traditional ways, by just sifting through the gold or the gold mixed with other stuff to extract just tiny bits of gold that remain. And here is me holding several £1,000s worth of raw gold, if you want to call it, which will then subsequently be made into necklaces. There's also gold mining, dredging for gold at sea from Nome. Gold was discovered in 1899 in Nome, and what differentiated it from lots of the other operations for gold at that time in Alaska was the ease at which it could be extracted from the ground. It was more or less lying on the sand at times. Those days are gone, but gold panning still exists at sea and has been made famous by the Discovery Channel and Sean Pomeranke, who owns a gold dredge called Christina Rose. So you might want to say that this is the modern day gold rush, i.e. TV right money and becoming a famous TV star. Brooks Falls is the definitive place to watch bears in Alaska. July and August are the best times to watch the bears, although there's another viewing time around September, and the reason for that is that in July and August that's when the salmon are leaping up the Brooks Falls to get back to spawn. There's also another salmon season in September. That's a different type of salmon. In July and August it's sockeye and silver salmon that are primarily there, and to me it was just quite amazing. I spent I think about 6 hours watching the bears and was just mesmerised by the whole thing. So I hope you really enjoy this video. The salmon are there in abundance, and certainly in September what the bears are trying to do is fatten themselves up so that they can survive the Alaskan winter. It was amazing to watch the bears, but by the end of my time I was actually almost willing the salmon to succeed to leap up the falls. Firstly, they run the danger of the bears, which is quite a big danger, but secondly they have to get up these falls, and towards the end of the video you'll see a bit more focused on the salmon, and at that it's really quite funny because they're just leaping and leaping and leaping and they're just not getting anywhere, and then suddenly you see through the water a salmon just sort of clinging to a rock and then managing to slither its way up over the falls and past the bears, and it's a bit like sort of cheering on the salmon. So that again was a really interesting part of the day. What's really interesting also about the bears is that they mostly just try to eat the head and the tail and the bottom part of the bear, which is, sorry, I should have said the bottom part of the salmon, And that's because that's where all the fat and goodness for bears is. They then discard a large part of the salmon, but the salmon doesn't go to waste. In Alaska, nothing ever goes to waste food-wise, because the seagulls and the other birds, including eagles, will actually take advantage of the bears' discarded bits of salmon and use that for feeding as well. And also the discarded salmon goes back into the river and creates nutrients for the salmon themselves, so that even although it looks as though the bears are being really wasteful, the reality is that it's an ecosystem that needs to happen to keep everything sort of ticking over and being healthy and productive. Here you can see a mother bear with 4 babies, and that was just quite an amazing experience. Apparently the babies aren't allowed into the water till I think they're about 6 months old, and that's because their fur isn't fully waterproof and therefore they could be susceptible to getting cold. We were actually on a viewing platform above the bears, so we were incredibly close to them, which was fantastic, and we were able to view them at really close quarters, but in a safe way, which was safe for us and also for the bears, which was just made the whole experience absolutely amazing. So I think I've really said enough about this video and about the bears of the Brooks Falls, and so I just hope you enjoy it. Actually, I should add something about how to get there. You actually fly to Brooks Falls by float plane, and that in itself is an absolutely fantastic experience because you don't go very high and you can see all the beautiful scenery en route to the bears. So that also adds to your experience. There's also quite interesting, as soon as you arrive there you go to bear school, and at bear school you learn how to not interact with bears but how to avoid bears, or how to make sure that you're safe around bears. So they explain to you, if you see a bear, then you don't run away, you don't step back, you actually stand your ground and walk back slowly and put your hands up to make yourself look big and make a lot of noise. And if you're in bear country, then what you're supposed to do is make noise as you're going along, so that you're not surprising bears, because bears won't attack people unless they're feeling frightened, and they won't come near you if they know that you're there. So therefore, for safety purposes, you have to really make noise, and then the bears will stay away from you. But at Brooks Falls you don't have to do that, because you're in an environment where you're protected and you can see the bears. However, having said that, bears take priority at Brooks Falls, as does all wildlife, over the human beings that are there, and sometimes it's difficult to get from one part of the falls from the lodge to Brooks Falls itself, which is a bit of a distance away due to there being a bear jam rather than a traffic jam. There's a bridge you have to cross across, and often if the bears are sort of wandering around and out and about, they like kind of wandering around this bridge, which then makes it less safe for human beings to be there, and so therefore they just close the bridge down and wait until the bears have done their thing, got to where they want to go for the day, and then they open up the bridge and let people walk by. So I thought that was really quite funny as well, that instead of having a traffic jam, Alaska's answer to traffic jams are actually bear jams, which were much more interesting. So as well as watching bears and looking at the salmon, then Brooks Falls is an absolute mecca for fishermen who go there obviously to catch the salmon, perhaps competing with the bears for the salmon. The fishermen also attend bear school and are very clearly told that if a bear approaches them and is sort of wanting their salmon, then the salmon belongs to the bear and not to the person. You're never going to outrun a bear. You're not going to be able to fight a bear, so you just relinquish the salmon and walk away and walk back a bit and then try again later. And while I was there were quite a few fishermen fishing for salmon, not right at Brooks Falls that you can see just now because there were just way too many bears there, but further on down the river then there are places where there are fewer bears because it's not so easy to catch salmon at those bits where the Brooks Falls are and where the salmon are leaping. There are just so many salmon. It would be almost impossible for bears not to catch salmon, and for people like me to be highly entertained and amused by all that was going on. Because Alaska is absolutely huge and it's got a tiny population of about 700,000 people, the cities and the towns of Alaska are spread throughout the state and are all very, very different. Anchorage is the most populated city in Alaska. It's got a population of about 300,000, and that's about over 40% of the whole population of Alaska. Although Anchorage is the most populated city and also is actually one of the most accessible cities, it's not the capital. Do you know it's the capital? being such a populated place, I thought that it would be quite busy, but in reality it's absolutely not busy at all. You can really walk around the city and see very few people, and it's a really pretty city with lots of flowers and just a lovely relaxed atmosphere. There are walks and cycle routes around about the city, and here, this is where sort of Alaska, you know you're in Alaska because you can be cycling along, and at the side of the cycle road you find a moose eating its lunch or dinner grass. So that was really quite amazing to see, and I have to admit I spent quite a lot of time looking at the moose, as you can see here, and thoroughly enjoying just being so close to these lovely animals. Anchorage also has lots of nice restaurants that you can eat in, and it's also known as a cultural centre, so it's a place that I certainly would definitely recommend going to visit if you're in Alaska. Anchorage is also the gateway to some spectacular train rides through Alaska, and I will be posting a video of that at some point in the not too distant future. Homer is a small city on the Kenai Peninsula. It sees itself as a bit of a hippie environment, and there are several interesting houses and artefacts in the city. We actually went to a music concert in Homer, and I also went kayaking, but I don't have any film of me kayaking because basically all you'd have got if I'd added that was basically my arms because of the way that I'd positioned my GoPro. Just along the road is Homer Spit, and that's where you go if you want to go kayaking. Whittier must be one of the weirdest towns in Alaska. It has a population of about 200, and 75 to 80% of them live in that building that you've just seen. It was actually built or developed to accommodate World War II and the Cold War because it's basically surrounded by mountains and it's misty all the time, which means it's very difficult to see it and stuff. It's really safe. Trains in Alaska aren't used by commuters, instead they are used by tourists like myself, and they take you through some absolutely spectacular scenery. So I'll not say anything much more about this part of the video other than to say I just hope you enjoy my journey by train through Alaska as part of my Alaska South to North adventure. seaward purports to be the start of the Iditarod Trail to Nome, but I think it's actually meant to start in Anchorage to Nome, with seaward being one of the places that it visits, but it's got itself down as mile zero. Seaward is also a cruise ship mecca and the jumping off point to the Harding ice fields, which are an absolutely fantastic, magnificent walking opportunity. You can access the Harding Icefield by bus from Seaward. Local buses take you there in just quite a short time, and Alaska being Alaska, you can see various wildlife en route. We saw a moose, and the bus driver, as usual, stopped to allow us to take pictures. The Harding Icefield is really beautiful. There are a number of walks that you can take from there. There's a simple walk to the glacier, and then there's another walk which takes you up, not to the very edge of the Harding Icefield, but it takes you up to close to the edge and a very good viewpoint. Being ice and snow, given global warming, the ice field is receding as are most glaciers, so you don't really get right up to the top of it, but even so you get beautiful views. From my point of view, the downside of it is that there are lots of cruise ship passengers who want to climb up there as well, which is understandable, but for me it sort of destroys what I regard as the mountain atmosphere, which to my perspective is one of being in the hills kind of on your own or with very few other people, and being able to enjoy remoteness. In Alaska there is a lot of remoteness, but one of the things that I've been trying to kind of argue in a recent article I wrote for Cicerone Press is that it's almost like wilderness among the crowds, certainly in the areas that it's possible for people like me to visit who's not an actual climber or who would go backpacking in bear country. Denali, or Mount McKinley, is an incredible mountain. It's not gettable to by your average hill walker, which I class myself as. You would need to be an incredibly experienced mountain climber to be able to achieve Mount McKinley, Denali. But what is possible to do if you're very lucky is to actually take a float plane to go close to Denali Mountain. It's not possible to do it all the time because the mountain is covered in mist a lot of the time, at least a third, I think, or possibly as much as 2/3. So the float planes can't get close to it. However, on the day that I did it, I was really, really lucky, and we managed to get within 2 to 3 kilometres of Denali. The float plane experience, which was taking us to Denali National Park, was quite incredible. One of the highlights of my trip, and I don't really know that there's a lot more that I can say about it other than look at this and just marvel, I guess, in the way that I marvelled. I had the privilege and the pleasure of being able to do this absolutely fantastically amazing journey. previously mentioned that you often meet lots of people when you're walking in the remote areas or the mountainous areas of Alaska due to the fact that you're competing with cruise ship passengers. Not so in Denali National Park, where you can actually go walking for quite long periods of time on your own. That's because 1, it's not a cruise ship destination, 2, it's remote, and 3, there aren't that much accommodation in the area. So I really enjoyed the time I spent walking in Denali National Park. It's just an amazing place to visit. Denali National Park is massive, about 5 million acres of wilderness. It's possible to walk in this wilderness, but really only if you're an experienced backpacker who's prepared to be totally self-sufficient and to be protected, to protect yourself from the wildlife, including the bears in the area, who clearly wander freely around the national park. There's a limited amount of accommodation, very expensive, that the tourists can spend time in the national park, and I spent a couple of nights there. It did give me the experience of seeing the Alaska that I thought that I was going to see, which was remote, unpopulated, pristine conditions. You can walk, as you've previously seen, up in the national park, up in the mountains on your own, and that's all fine. The views in the national park are spectacular. The wildlife is amazing. It's just an incredible experience to go to see Denali National Park. The downside of that, of course, is that these spectacular views are ones that people also want to see, or other people want to see, and as you're driving out of the national park, well, I should explain, we flew into Denali National Park and then we went out by bus along this highway, and as you get closer to, I guess, the main towns in Alaska, then you get lots and lots of people on buses, tourists driving down the road. So this wilderness experience becomes a bit diluted by passing loads of buses coming in the opposite direction of tourists who clearly also want to see the things that I want to see in Alaska. And I suppose it sounds a wee bit selfish on my part that I wanted it all to myself, but hey ho, that's what I did want. But despite the fact that there were these buses, we had an absolutely amazing time driving the Denali National Park road, and you can see from the pictures and the videos what spectacular scenery that we actually passed through on the way. Fairbanks Antique Auto Museum is a really nice place to visit. It's full of these absolutely incredible old cars, all totally polished up to the hilt. There's probably not a lot more I can say about it other than just have a wee look at the video and see what you think. My next port of call was to drive the Dalton Highway, and I was kind of wondering when I was wandering around this museum whether any of these cars would be something that I could maybe hire to drive that road alongside of the ice road truckers. When you see the next part of the video, I'll leave you to decide whether or not these cars would have made it. So now I'm on the Dalton Highway, the ice road truckers route from Anchorage to Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse. It's an amazing road. It's, I guess, it's one of the most dangerous roads in the winter that you could probably ever drive. I drove it in the summer, but even in the summer it was really challenging drive. Firstly, it was 500 miles long and I did that in one day. Secondly, a lot of it is off-road. Thirdly, there are no mobile phone connections anywhere on the route, and so therefore you have to contact other people by CB radio, and the trucks have right of way, so you have to constantly be telling them where you are so that they know where you are, and then you have to sort of pull over to let them pass. Fourthly, because a lot of it's off-road, it's very muddy, and when it rains, as it did on my journey, you get mud splashed onto your car, onto your windscreen, and that means that you become a sort of little mud pool, and you're constantly having to use your windscreen wipers in order that you can even see. The actual trip itself is amazing. It's you pass the Arctic Circle and you head for Prudhoe Bay. It's not the prettiest road in the world because it's basically you're going to an industrial area, not an oil field, and along the way what you see a lot of is the pipes of the oils, and you're passing by the trucks that service the oil field. But I actually really wanted to drive this road just to say that I'd actually driven with the ice road truckers, and I really enjoyed it. It's not the prettiest road in the world, but I actually found it an amazing drive, and I was really pleased that I did it. It was really one of my highlights of my trip to Alaska, and I hope you will also enjoy this trip as you look at this part of the video. here I am in Barrow. Barrow is Alaska's most northerly point and the final objective in my trip to Alaska, Alaska south to north. I was wildly excited, as you can imagine, to actually get here and to realise that I'd achieved my objective of getting to the north of Alaska. It took 4 weeks. It involved travelling by foot, by train, by plane, by boat, by car. It involved visiting amazing tourist sites, remote areas like Nome. It involved visiting all sorts of different environments. I got to see the bears of Alaska. I really feel that travelling in this way and in all this variety of different transports really allowed me to see what Alaska was really about, because Alaska isn't just what the tourists see, which is the kind of pretty beautiful mountainous areas and glaciers. It's also places like Dead Horse and Prudhoe Bay where the oil is. It's also the Dalton Highway. It's also Nome and it's gold mining. It's Brooks Falls and it's bears. It's Denali National Park with its absolutely fantastically magnificent scenery, but also its 5 million acres of pristine wilderness that, unless you're a really serious backpacker, it's not possible for you to really get into. But I was thrilled at getting here and just completely overwhelmed. The white stuff you see here is actually snow, because we were arriving in Barrow as it was coming into the sort of autumn winter, so it was actually quite good fun to arrive in Barrow and make a snowman at Alaska's most northerly point. It seemed quite fitting. And then next we sort of whizzed our way along to the actual true north, and with the objective of putting my feet in the Alaskan water at its most northerly point, or its most northerly point you're able to go to, because you're not allowed to go the last few feet just because of fear of polar bears kind of landing, which they were actually due to do more or less any day now, because the sea was beginning to freeze up. And so here I am standing in the sea at Alaska's most northerly point. Yay!